If you have a fever,
Yes, every once in a while.
I enjoyed my child. Of course, moving from there to London, I met my husband. I met my husband in England.
Lifelong Lutheran.
He was the best.
I mean, lifelong. Baptized, raised, went to school, not only grade school, but high school.
Went to the same school, knew his name.
My coming here has been dragged westward, progression.
That didn't happen until he was a friend of my sister's husband. That's how we met.
Before.
We got married in 1963.
And I kind of followed them out here.
My first son was Kevin. He was born 1966. And I have three sons, Kevin, Paul, and Brian. My son. We lived in England for a while. We moved to New York City. We stayed there, and of course, I worked with the Board of Education for a while. I've been a Board of Ed for 28 years. Yeah, I like teaching, of course. I got my bachelor's. I didn't get my master's degree, but I got a bachelor's degree in education. And of course, stayed there, retired, and then came to Florida. My son was already here. My son lived down the street from here. St. Raymond, right down the street from here. St. Raymond or Sebastian. St. Raymond. Just off the 75. We were right there. So we retired from New York. And we came here. He said, Mommy and Daddy, you need to come. You need to, because we were born in that place. So you need to retire to a place that is, hard. And so we chose Florida. Yeah, so that's how we came to know the church. We were right there. And we came around Easter time. Easter time is when we came, 2004. And I was home, and of course, we accustomed to going to church. We never miss church.
Okay, who needs more time?
Me.
Everybody good? You got any more time?
Yeah.
Okay, stay another minute.
So that was it. So that's how we got to get St. Paul. And we said, we start walking. We walked to public. And we looked in the directory, and we saw St. Paul, we walked. So this is how we found the St. Paul. So, we're not moving till they move me out.
She's a treasure.
Okay, so we good? Everybody has time to share?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, so let me ask a question. How many of you learned the middle name of somebody at your table? Raise your hand. One? What's the middle name you learned? John. Anybody else learn a middle name? Nope. So we know the overachievers. No, I'm just kidding. Isn't it funny sometimes when you're given this directive of how you're going to go and do simple introductions and meet, sometimes we just leave it at surface, and sometimes we learn more than we ever anticipated. How many of you learned something else about somebody at your table that you didn't know before? Yeah? How many of you think you've had at your table the longest attending person at St. Paul in this room? So, without discussing, individually at your table, raise your hand if you think somebody at your table has been here longer than anybody else at St. Paul. Raise your hand.
Yeah.
I've been here since day one.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to at your table. So wait, raise your hand if you think you have somebody at your table that's been here longer than anybody else in the room.
Anybody else?
All right, so
We have somebody at our table.
so in other words, I've only been here going on 4 years, August the 6th.
Anybody else in the room?
So I'm not the longest attending person at St. Paul in this room. So you had your hand raised, you had your hand raised. The old, and Kyle says his hand raised. So the oldest person at that table, not age-wise, but has been here the longest, please stand. Same thing at that table. You're the two tables, right? And then Kyle. So how long have you been in attendance, Beatrix? How many years?
28.
28. Kyle?
26.
Sit down.
I attended before the first worship service was held by St. Paul.
So how many years?
That's got to be over 30 years.
Okay, all right. Okay, now, how many of you at your table have somebody who's attended the shortest amount of time here in St. Paul?
Myself.
At your table. That table doesn't listen.
No, we don't.
All right, raise your hand. You raise your hand, you raise your hand. All right, whoever at your table you think has attended the shortest amount of time, years-wise, please stand. Whoever that person is. Okay, how long?
I think he's attended
Less than half a year.
Half a
5
year?
years.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? And how long? Over a year? Okay. So we have some that have been here less than a year. How many have attended somewhere in between? Everybody else. And then somebody who's been here the longest. But what makes us the same? It's the same Jesus. It's the same salvation story. It's the same partnership that we entered in together to share with one another. Amen? So with that said, I want to do two things today. I want us to embark on something new as we engage in the eyewitness account of the Gospels. We're going to watch an introductory. It's going to be their version of trying to have a quote-unquote eyewitness statement as to why the Gospels were written. Here's who we were writing to, kind of inclusive of the Gospel story. And then for the next 3 weeks at least, we're going to cover the synoptics. We're going to hear from Matthew about the Gospel that he wrote, Mark and Luke. But before we do that, the reason I think it's a good time to do that is there's many of us that went to Israel that had an experience while we were there, and I think that can really translate well, particularly when we listen to how and why and to whom they were writing and the intent they assumed the readers would understand. Does that make sense? So I could assume that I knew who the oldest attending member was in this room. I could assume that I knew who the shortest member attending was in this room. I could assume who does or doesn't have children. And even at your table, now that you know that stuff, when you write it, you would write with the assumption that they already know this stuff about me. So I'm not going to give my dissertation of my name is such and such, I have this many kids. They're going to assume you already understand that. So we're going to dive into Scripture and unravel some of that. But before we do, I asked to shoot in an email some pictures of some of you all that were in the Holy Land, and I'm going to bring some of these up, and we know who the overachievers are when we get to the end of this. But, for instance, this picture. You want to explain that picture to us, Jim? Why? Huh? Bobby took this picture? How cool. Jim, do you know where you are?
Yes.
Where are you?
Sea Galilee.
Sea Galilee. So, did you send us in or Terry? Terry did. So, what do you think? What do you think Terry meant when she said this is one of the things that really meant a lot to her? First of all, what are you standing on? So everybody who hasn't been there can experience this. Is it sand?
It's like a rocky sand.
Okay. And the rock primarily there is basalt stone. We know that because the first Temple Mount that's there, or temple, the first synagogue that was there, the actual basalt foundation is still there. You can see it, right? You remember that when we went? So are you standing near Magdala? Are you standing up near Capernaum? Are you standing standing down by the multiplication of loaves and fish? Are you outside where Peter was confessing and reinstated?
Where Peter was.
His church of primacy where he was reinstated? Yes. Okay. And tell us what is that? Well, come in. Or anybody who went and helped you remember what is right here. Not right there, but right.
The statue.
Statue of what? Go ahead and describe it to us.
The one day she's not here. Or Jesus reinstated Peter.
And what was that? Y'all remember the story of Jesus reinstating Peter? Yeah, what happened? Yeah. Do you love me more than these? Right? 3 times he asked him. We talked about that. And the word love that Jesus used, he said, do you agape me? And Peter answered, yes, I philo you. Love you like a brother. You don't read that in English. And Jesus again said, do you agape me? A God unconditional kind of love. And again, Peter answered, yes, Lord, I philo you. The third time Jesus finally said, okay, Peter, do you philo me? And that's when Peter cried and realized, yes, Lord, you know. That's where you were standing, traditionally where the site was, where Jesus called to come and have breakfast.
I do remember, like, the water was so cool and refreshing, and it was almost like a cleansing for us.
Mm. The cool springs that were shooting in right there. All right, cool. Anybody want to ask any questions about that? What about this one? Anybody remember what that is? That was the, yeah.
We walked through that really cold water before we got here.
This is the tree, yes. The Jordan River that came out of Hallel Lake that runs down from Mount Hermon, which is 9,000 feet above sea level, right? Rapid cold water that came down, and we stood underneath the tree right up outside of Tel Dan. Who said that? Yeah, Tel Dan. Remember Tel Dan was where they built one of the altars? Where if you don't know Old Testament history, you wouldn't know that they also established a golden calf or a calf they put there on the altar. Remember that? One of two different sites. Jeroboam, when he was king, did that. Wow. Old Testament came to life. And we're standing here under this gigantic tree. You remember what kind of tree it was?
Sycamore?
Not a sycamore.
Cedar.
What was it? Not cedar.
I said that, but I was just guessing.
Not oak. For all those that went to Israel, you got homework. Come back next week, you'll tell us what kind of tree it is. You remember as he pointed off down the valley right there on the other side, you saw one right there, he said that's bearing fruit. You remember that?
The fig tree.
You look it up and we'll come back next week. All right. All right, what's this one? Did you send this one in?
No.
Okay.
First night in Egypt.
How do you know?
It was a dinner, and they cooked. I remember they cooked the chicken from below the ground.
Yeah, so who were the people that we were there eating with? Bedouins? The Bedouins, remember? And then right here, you can see he's making the bread. It's kind of like pizza, you know. He's making the bread, he puts it on this hot plate, and fires it up, and then puts it over to the side. And back over in the back corner off the edge of that building was the pit where they lowered the chicken down in different layers, and it was down this huge pit. They pulled it out, and we ate that. And right over here was a sitting area. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And what kind of animal was in huge abundance right there in that sitting area? Cats. You remember that? Ton of cats were right there. And then over here, they opened up this whole tent-like area that we sat on the floor, and we had this Bedouin meal, and then there was like dancing, and it was a whole lot of fun. So who are the two people that are standing there?
Jody.
Terry and Jody. I see Irene. I see Prop. Katie. Jen. I don't even know who those were. And then our guy, and then Gary taking the picture. Where's Gary?
Oh.
You see him taking the picture there? So we were in the middle of the desert. What do you notice as we drove to get to this spot? Tell us about the terrain.
Arid, closed-in mountains, unbelievably dry.
Yeah. Did you have any, I mean,
Unforgiving.
any trees, right?
Not a blade of grass.
We're down near the Sinai Peninsula, and we're in the middle of nowhere desert, and it was hot, and not much grass around. This would have been an area they would have gone through as the children of Israel would have been leaving, going up into the Promised Land. This is a cool photo. What's this?
Wailing Wall.
The Wailing Wall?
Western Wall.
You mean what says Jim and Steve adding prayers to the Wailing Wall? That part?
Or Western Wall, whatever, yeah.
So describe this for those of us that haven't been here. I don't even know, is that like a box? What is that?
The divider.
That's a divider. What do you mean? I don't, help me describe the picture. What's the divider?
Men and women,
Men and women, what about them?
that they were separated.
Separated by the wall. So the women I consider on this side, right, Jim? The women are on the right side of the wall, the men are on the left side of the wall. And what is this? You see the stones and how they're, each stone is cut out? How it's like edge all the way around. And that was Herod's wall. That's all that remains of that temple period in him when he rebuilt the temple. And when you go directly underneath the earth, down about 100 feet, how big is the stone? You remember we saw it? Would I be wrong to say it's probably about as big as this wall right here? At one point, huge stones. And how they got them in, they're still there underneath the Temple Mount. And then what's all the stuff that's shoved inside the cracks? Prayers of what? Who? Who knows? What are the prayers? Prayers of whatever prayers on your heart, your mind. You take it, you write it down, you put it in the wall. What's the significance of that? Where does a Jew this day go to open and confess their prayers in the temple?
This is the closest point.
There's no temple. Hadn't been rebuilt.
Yeah.
So where do they go?
This is the
The
closest
closest
point.
place they can get.
Yeah.
So if you're a woman, you have to be on the right-hand side. But what did you get to see? What did we get to see while we were there? A lot of bar mitzvahs that were happening. And so did the women participate?
No, from the other side.
Yeah.
Stood on chairs.
Chairs, and then throw stuff over and see over. Then what did the young boys who were being bar mitzvah, what did they get to do? If you go to the left directly, what do you go into?
Library, isn't it?
The library, underneath the Temple Mount. And inside there they had huge ornate boxes that held the Torah, the scrolls. And they'd bring these big old things out. They'd take them, they'd set them up in stations, and they would have 3 or 4 maybe going on at one time. What was one thing that unique that happened while we were visiting the Western Wailing Wall?
When they tried to go push the security.
Who's they? Because we all weren't there.
Those dudes
There
were on
were
mission.
a bunch of Jewish guys, they were coming to the high priest.
So wait, what kind of Jewish guys? Because this is important. Just Orthodox, Hasidic Jews. Some of them even had the phylacteries already on their head, wrapped on their arm, ready to go and pray.
To fill him.
To what?
To fill him.
Yeah, they were ready to go pray, right? And,
But the high priest had shown up.
but we didn't know that,
We
right?
didn't know who it was, but this car just started rolling up, and these guys just started storming the gates, jumping over the gates and trying to get to them. They wanted to be the closest to the
Now,
high priest.
when you say gates, you've been to the airport, right? And gone through security and trying to go through. That's the kind of gates. I mean, we're talking about high security, and they were just jumping over and just like a mob crowd, just rushing. And a couple of them got taken back, apprehended, handcuffed, and who knows what happened to them.
It was like some celebrity showed up.
Absolutely.
He pulled up in his, Escalade or whatever it was, and he's driving up to the wall. And I turned around, and there's like 25 of them sprinting at me, and they're not dressed for sprinting. It was.
Long black robes and
Oh, yeah.
their cords tied around and tassels, and they were taking off, right? And they ran all the way down just so they could be close to the high priest of the wall, the Wailing Wall, as he went up and he said his prayer and then he left. It was very interesting.
It kind of gave me the sense as to what it would have been like in Jesus' times when people were trying to rush to Jesus and trying to get to him. It kind of had like that sense, that desire. You just see those people just doing everything. I mean, for as tight as security was over there, I mean, I was surprised to see people jumping through it and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great insight. All right, how about this one?
Is it the gym show?
That's Where are you?
Pyramids of Giza.
Pyramids of Giza.
about to
Yeah,
say,
it's
it's
a great
Bible.
pyramid.
Who's that?
And? Describe it.
Sorry.
What was about that you think really stood out for you all, sitting that in?
Well, first time on camels, the enormity of the pyramids. I think our guide told us for the Great Pyramid, if you cut up hand size all of the stones in that pyramid, you could go across the United States and back.
Wow.
That's how big it is.
Interesting.
Huge. Huge. Did you all go in?
No.
And the camels, easy to get up and get on?
It took a little while to kind of, it's high. You're up
Yeah.
high.
It's amazing how inverted they can get when they're standing up and how you gotta hold on so you don't fall off the front.
Yeah.
We had, who was it in our group?
Lisa.
No, who almost got rolled over on?
Lisa.
Lisa Reed?
No, the Coleman's friends, Lisa.
Oh, yeah. The one camel was like, I'm having none of it, and he went down, and started to roll, and she fortunately jumped off. But we're talking about, these animals are huge, it would crush her. But, yeah, and also too, it's always good to be sure you have a good guide. So if you ever ride a camel in Egypt, here's my disclaimer, don't pay until it's time to get off. Because they say $20, ride a camel, great, you ride the camel, you get to the end, they go, okay, $20 to get off. You're like, what? Ah. And you just can't jump down from a camel. They're pretty
They
big.
have to get the bed done.
All right, how about this one? Ah, who is this again?
She's not here.
Wait. Anybody know what this picture is that was there besides Jim and Terry? Renewal
Renewal
vows.
vows.
Cana Wedding Chapel and renewing your vows. Yeah, everybody had a chance. Nobody knew. They were all surprised. I about even forgot to include my wife for starting off the ceremony to come up there and got a rose and got to renew their vows at the wedding chapel at Cana.
Did they have enough wine this time?
You know what? There's a little boy who went to Sunday school and his dad was driving home. He said, what did you talk about in Sunday school? He said, Dad, Jesus went to weddings. He said, really? How do you know? He said, well, we learned about Jesus going to the wedding at Cana. He said, well, what happened? He said, well, Dad, Jesus turned water into wine. He said, really? He said, well, what did you learn about that? He said, well, if you're going to have a wedding, you better invite Jesus. And we didn't have any water into wine, but, all right, how about this? Those of you who didn't go, what is this?
Dome of the Rock.
Dome of the Rock. What is that? What is the Dome of the Rock?
It's where Abraham sacrificed Isaac.
It's where Abraham was called, Mount Moriah. This would have been Mount Moriah, where Abraham was to sacrifice his son Isaac. And what else is it?
One of the Muslim
Section point of the Muslim faith.
Yeah, where Abraham was supposed to ride the great white horse into heaven, right? Is from the Dome of the Rock.
Muhammad said to us.
Abraham sacrificed Isaac, supposed to be right there in Mount Moriah. What else?
The torn cloth was there.
Yeah, where the temple, the Holy of Holies, when the temple was built, was right there. So such a contentious place, but obviously it was very important. Somebody saw. What about this one? Tom and Christy, they're not here. You know where they are?
This would look like Galilee as well.
So is this on the northern side or the southern side of the sea? And how can you tell?
I think it's the northern side.
It's the northern, what side, east or west?
It was from the west.
West side. Why? What's this back in the background?
So
Golan Heights, right? In Syria on the other side of the sea. And what about this one? I know who sent this one in. Gary, tell us about this picture.
That's our baptism in the Jordan River.
So is that where you were baptized or where, what?
Rebaptized.
Not rebaptized, but
Remembrance.
reburned your baptismal faith. And yeah, you're right. I know what you mean. But your baptism is only a one and done thing. You don't have to be rebaptized. That's what the Anti-Baptist is. That's what Luther railed against in the Book of Concord, in the Confessions, in the 1500s. That's what the Anti-Baptist, meaning rebaptized word. It said the first time it didn't work. So what happened here is for remembrance of the baptism and the promises and thanking God for what he did for you on the day you were baptized. Jordan River, is it clean? Not there, it's not, right? And is it big?
No.
This is Yashadid, and this is one of the two sites. The other site is a more commercialized site, probably not the site where it was. So why did we go to this site this time? Because previously you couldn't get in there because in the battles early on with Jordan, there was landmines all around, leaving the main road, so it was not safe to travel. They cleared all the landmines out, and now it's safe to go back into this part for the baptism.
And there was security on the other side of the bank.
Just
I know,
right across.
Jordan was right up in the top
Those
left.
bushes are better than Jordan.
Yeah, so go ahead. What they're saying is right here, this actually is the country of Jordan, and this is Israel. And one more. The Canaan Wedding Chapel. It's the outside of the Canaan Wedding Chapel. Okay. That's what you say?
Chrissy's holding it.
Oh yeah, Christy is holding the rose that she got.
But that was modernized, right? It didn't look like that.
Yeah, no, that one is, I don't even know what century. I don't remember our guy even telling us really what century that was. Do y'all remember? Yeah, we could not go in actually the wedding church. By the time we got there, it was the longest day forever. That was like, we did Caesarea Maritima on the coast, and then we drove all the way up to Tel Megiddo, and we were there for a long time. Actually too long, I think. And then we left Tel Megiddo and went down into Nazareth. And in Nazareth, we went to the Church of Annunciation, where the angel appeared to Mary, Gabriel appeared to Mary, and then we went up to Joseph's house, which is right up the hill right behind it. And then we went over to the wedding chapel, and that's covering a couple hundred miles, actually, in distance-wise, travel-wise, not including all the time that we spent and going through the area. So when we got there, the chapel had already closed. Actually, they were supposed to have a wedding, and the wedding party didn't get there, so they said, well, you can use the reception side, so that's what we did, to have our little time together. Okay. Maybe we'll get some more and we'll show more pictures. So, again, eyewitness account. Let's listen to some of the explanation of what we're going to dive into as we continue going through this eyewitness account of the Gospels. Somebody get the lights, please.
In what direction is Jerusalem?
How would you answer the question? We writers address that question many times in the New Testament, and any Israelite of my time would easily have been able to answer it. Google it.
The writers of the New Testament didn't spend much time on the economic, cultural, political, and geographical facts of the day because their original readers were already aware of them.
We writers of the Gospels did not spend precious scroll space writing about such things as politics, geography, or trade routes. You probably have very little knowledge of those things as they existed in my time, but everyone in our time had a good understanding of them. With a rudimentary understanding of our trade routes, geography, and politics, you'll be able to spot many nuances in our gospel stories that you would otherwise miss. I will tell you nothing here that is crucial to your salvation, but there are some things that will enhance your understanding and enjoyment of the New Testament. More important than having that knowledge is the new ability you will attain of understanding my peers as people, not much different than yourselves. Many people of your time consider people like me as so distant in time and experience as to be almost mythical characters. We were concerned about the same issues as you. Just like you, we worried about how to make enough money to feed our families and ourselves. We wanted to wear clothes that made us feel good around our friends. And we wanted to be loved by others. We got tired when we walked uphill, and we hurt badly when we got beaten or stoned. The daily news informed us about making decisions, and world events, and politics and economics influenced our lives whether we liked it or not. Exactly like your lives are influenced by those same factors. Let's start by looking at the last Old Testament book, Malachi. It was written more than 4 centuries before Jesus was born. What happened during that long, long period of God's silence? On the world stage, empires influencing Israel came and went. During Malachi's time, the Persians were dominant. Following them were the Greeks, the Roman Republic, and the Roman Empire. Jesus and I were born during the rule of the Roman Empire. Augustus was the first Roman emperor. He ruled from 27 BC to 14 AD. He was emperor when Jesus was born. He established many new laws and ensured peace throughout the empire that would last for more than a century. Tiberius was his son, and he ruled from 14 AD to 37 AD, the time period when Jesus taught and when the early church was established. Rome's emperors ruled their vast empire by delegating authority to local leaders, who would delegate some authority to native leaders. Emperor Augustus granted his authority over Judea to King Herod in 37 BC, and ruled until about the time of Jesus' birth. He was also known as Herod the Great. One son, Herod Antipas, ruled Galilee during the life of Jesus and for about a decade thereafter. He was involved with the trial of Jesus and the death of John the Baptist. Agrippa I was the grandson of Herod the Great. He ruled over much of Israel from 37 to 44 AD, which was during the time of the growth of the church. His son, Agrippa II, ruled over much of Israel from 44 AD until 92 AD, when the church really exploded in growth. These are the Agrippas referred to in the Bible. Additionally, Rome had their own officials who dealt with Judea, such as Pontius Pilate. On a more local level, the Romans allowed the Jewish leaders to make many decisions. In Judea, virtually all the citizens were Jewish. Since the time of Malachi, the Jews had grown in number and once again dominated the population of the area formerly controlled by the 12 tribes of Israel. During those 4 silent centuries, the Jews had greatly developed their theology and leadership structure. The Jewish leaders were organized into a body known as the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was primarily composed of the leaders from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, 2 Jewish sects. The Sadducees were wealthier and more politically motivated, while the Pharisees were more legalistic about their Jewish religion. There was a constant tension between the Romans and the Jews. The Jews, they wanted to be independent and not pay taxes to Rome, while the Romans wanted Jews to be peaceful and pay taxes. However, the Roman and Jewish leaders had several things in common. They both wanted trade to increase, peace to prevail, and wanted to retain their political positions. To do those things, it was all about the money. Just as Bill Clinton's U.S. presidential campaign in the 90s once trumpeted, "It's the economy, stupid." Google it. Before I started following Jesus, I was a doctor. I was highly educated and I was acutely aware of how the rise and fall of countries, rulers, and families began with international trade and how trade routes functioned. In fact, I was quite aware that Jesus located his headquarters in Capernaum because it was located on a crucial spur of the ancient trade route known as the Via Maris, or Way of the Sea. The Via Maris trade route went from Damascus to Caesarea to Egypt. On its northeast end, it met other trade routes in Damascus, which went on to Europe and Asia. On its southwest end, it met other trade routes in Egypt, which reached Africa. In its middle was the city of Caesarea, a newly built deep water port that reached Rome and the rest of the Mediterranean Sea. The Via Maris trade route was critical to worldwide trade, and whoever controlled it became fabulously wealthy. In fact, the Via Maris was the main reason Israel was a critical country in my time, instead of an unimportant piece of property like most of the land in the world. The Via Maris became critical in my lifetime because King Herod created the deep water port of Caesarea in 10 BC. This greatly increased the trade on the Via Maris and was the main reason King Herod became so famously wealthy. Trade routes in your modern world are so numerous and ubiquitous that you don't even think about them. Your paved roads and trucks and airplanes and shipping containers are all part of a massive interconnected global set of trade routes. Your life is hugely influenced by these trade routes, but you don't even notice. In 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower made a drastic change in the trade routes through the United States, while he also changed the military security of the nation. He began the interstate highway system that greatly improved how quickly the military could deploy, as well as vastly improving the trading routes throughout the country. President Eisenhower was intimately familiar with the vast highway system that the ancient Romans had built, and may have gotten the interstate highway idea from them. The highway system of the Romans greatly improved how quickly its military could deploy, as well as vastly improving its trade routes. Its highway system was a major factor in the empire staying in power over a vast area for hundreds of years. You have far fewer transportation limitations than we had, but you have the same basic trade limitations we had. There has to be a source of supply and a source of demand for a product. The cost of transportation, thievery, taxes, it all has to be low enough for the price of the product stay reasonable as it moves through the trade route. It's much costlier to transport heavy and bulky objects. Finally, governments can force uneconomic transactions through the trade routes by military force and government regulations. In the times of the New Testament, there were certain products that tended to dominate international trade flows. Rome controlled northern Africa, so it forced the flow of grain, gold, and slaves from northern Africa. Rome's 1 million citizens required a huge amount of food every day that could only be supplied by massive grain ships from Africa. Asia supplied Rome with silks, perfumes, spices, other precious objects in return for gold, jewels, and slaves. Israel produced wine, grain, and fish. During my lifetime, Rome was wealthy and trade flowed like never before. From an economic point of view, Israel did better in my life than it had for 1,000 years. The Via Maris trade route went through Capernaum. Don't you think Jesus knew that when he moved his headquarters there? The Roman highways and ancient trade routes spurred trade, but also provided the early Christian missionaries easy ways to travel so they could effectively evangelize. In fact, almost all the early churches were founded along Roman highways and trade routes and shipping ports. Looking at some of the cities in Israel, Capernaum was a prosperous city during the time of Jesus because it was a supplier of fish from the Sea of Galilee. It also produced grinding tools from the local lava rock. It was a natural choke point on the Via Maris trade route. Caesarea was important because it was the only deep water port on the coast of Israel. Jerusalem was important because it was the crossroads of local trade routes and was the center of religious worship and local government. Before leaving these topics, I want to mention one more thing. You may not think of food production very often since agriculture involves only a tiny number of people in modern countries. In my time, farming was a very critical aspect of life. Owning land was critical, which is why it was handed down from generation to generation. Geographical considerations of space and land fertility were critical to most families. As in most societies, food production was the main source of employment for most people. Some experts believe as many as 90% of people in ancient cultures were involved with producing food. When Jesus used agricultural stories, almost everyone had a vivid understanding of what he was talking about. As you learn the stories of the Bible, I hope you'll be able to remember these facts about trade routes, geography, and politics. The people of the New Testament were much like you. They made the best decisions they could given the information they had. And they had much more information about their times that you do not have. And they inherently understood how that information was interwoven in the stories Jesus told. Every listener of Jesus knew that if a Samaritan was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, he would be going downhill on a highway well known for its thieves and robbers. They knew that the Samaritans were religious enemies of the Jews, but some of Jesus' earliest converts were Samaritans. Every listener of Jesus knew that the Jews often took the road from Jerusalem to Jericho to avoid going through Samaria, but the Samaritans rarely took that road. Because of our knowledge of geography, politics, and trade routes, we heard Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan as a story of God extending impossibly unlikely grace and love to someone who had chosen to be separated from God. That was incredibly good news to us, not just a nice story. So up. The answer, it's up. Since Jerusalem is located in the mountains, in what direction is Jerusalem? Up. Google it.
If you drive on it, we experience it, we know it. When you have a little bit of a history with it, it puts it together. Okay, so was this too long? Insightful? Are we good? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this. We're going to hear, next week we're going to hear from, who do you think? You've only got a couple to choose from.
Matthew.
Who?
Matthew.
Next week is Mark.
Oh, my.
Next week is Mark. So here's what I want you to do. This week, if you have a Bible, how many of you have a Bible at home? How many of you have more than one Bible at home? How many of you opened up this year? Okay. I want you to turn to the front, and usually you're going to have some kind of outline or history of the author or year of his writing, a little bit of what it's about. If you have the Lutheran Study Bible, then you have where Volin Gospel appears within the context. Read about Luke. He just briefly mentioned it, but it's so much out through what he wrote. He's a doctor. He's the one that mentions the hematidrosis, the sweat like blood that Jesus had on that night he was betrayed. He's the one that mentions some of the unbelievable miracles of physical healing. So read a little bit about Luke and get ready to come in next week as we dive into Mark. Who would like to close us with prayer? Dare I ask Beverly? Please.
Father, we just learned from your precious word here. You have many names. Rapha, Jireh. You comfort us when we need it. I haven't been to Israel. I hope to one day see it, or I'll see it with Jesus anyway. But thank you, Spirit, for bringing the words out of my mouth, and may I relay this to all my precious brothers and sisters to spend time with you all week and every day. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. Go in peace and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
And if anybody can help with the coffee tables and chairs we need to put away for school.
If anybody can help put coffee and the tables and chairs away,
Grab a chair.
particularly if you went to early service, that'd be